2017 is already a great year for horror, but there's a lot of great games coming up as well. I'm Falcon, and today on GameRanx, here's the top 10 horror games in 2017. Number 10 is Agony, a survival horror game that takes place, of all places, in hell. Now, this game has a very distinct visual style that is a little bit disturbing on top of just really interesting looking. They've done a great job with something that really hasn't been depicted in, well, let's just say interesting way in the past. It's always very typical, but this, not so much. The atmosphere is essentially the main priority of the developers, and the gameplay relies on a combination of stealth and puzzle gameplay in order to give you a unique experience. In all seriousness, it looks like a very unique game, and I'm really hoping that it turns out to be as good as it looks. Number 9 is Pamela, a sci-fi FPS open world horror game. You wake up from cryosleep in a utopian city by the name of Eden, and as it turns out, everybody is hostile and infected with a disease that disfigures them. The game incorporates survival elements, and essentially the goal is to find out what on earth happened in Eden that pretty much sent everything into a spiral. In a lot of ways, it kind of makes me think of a futuristic BioShock, except for a lot more open-ended, and I love the sound of that. Number 8 is Visage, a game set in a huge house where terrible things have happened. Now, the game is for sure a spiritual successor to PT, the would-be Hideo Kojima take on Silent Hills, a game that took the world by storm but then was cancelled because Konami is awful. Fortunately, a few developers have taken up the mantle of this game. We'll talk about a couple more of them later, but this one I think is interesting on account it centers around the history of a location, showing the visage of each one of the killings. Number 7, What Remains of Edith Finch, is a first-person narrative adventure game specifically built to give you the willies. It's one of those truly beautiful games, and it's got that kind of visual style that mirrors The Vanishing of Ethan Carter a little bit, but it does have a very heavy, original atmosphere to it. It comes from the developers of The Unfinished Swan, which is kind of an otherworldly, creepy game in and of itself, but Edith Finch looks to take it a bit further. The gameplay itself has an otherworldly vignette style in which you learn about various different family members who have been left behind, so to speak. The Ethan Carter similarities really don't last too long because if you start to look into the game itself, you see that the gameplay wildly can vary from different story to different story. It seems very interesting, and if they pull it off, I think it's going to be really cool. Number 6 is a game called Scorn, which is inspired by the art of H.R. Geiger. If I'm not saying that name right, I do apologize to Mr. Geiger. But if you've ever seen his art, it's very surreal, and at times a bit unsettling, to say the very least. The game Scorn itself is built on the idea of immersion. The intent is to make interaction with the world a little bit more real, as well as make sure that you're aware of the character's body movements, on top of giving you an open-ended, lived-in, interconnected world with a large number of mazes called regions, as well as its own story that gradually unveils a tapestry of nightmarish reality for the surrealist world you're occupying. Number 5 is Friday the 13th, an asynchronous multiplayer attempt at a very interesting concept, where several players play as the campers and one plays as Jason Voorhees. It's not entirely dissimilar to the idea of Evolve, except for the, main stupid thing about Evolve isn't in the game. Instead, the game centers around one of America's horror mainstays for the last, 3 or 4 decades. And also it seems like it's being made without tie-in to a new movie or anything like that, so it kind of seems like it could be a really good game. The game got delayed from 2016 to 2017 so they could do a single-player mode, and that makes me very happy because I thought this game looked really cool, but I really wanted a single-player mode. Count me in. Number 4 is Hello Neighbor, a game that kind of takes a concept that I think is really cool. You essentially need to sneak into your neighbor's house to find out what he's hiding in the basement. Makes it a little bit cartoony, but at the same time very unsettling. Makes it a stealth game where you move very fast, but so does the neighbor as you have to avoid him, and works more specifically around the ideas of sandbox gaming, where you come up with many different ways of doing the things that you're supposed to do, as well as relies on suspense as opposed to jump scares. If this game works out, it's going to be entirely because it has interesting physics and good environmental interaction. Everything we've seen of it so far does give it a very heightened, tense atmosphere, as well as a unique visual style. Hello Neighbor comes off as a very unique game, and from everything I've seen, looks like it's gonna probably either be one of those really, really good, amazing games that just came out of nowhere, or kind of flop. I feel like there's not gonna be a possible in-between with this, so hopefully it's great. The pre-alpha demo's pretty sweet, you can check it out, but the full game promises to be much larger. Number 3 is Routine, a space horror game in first person where everybody on a moon base where you happen to be has disappeared. It's your job to figure out what went on in this abandoned moon base. This is one of those very mysterious projects that updates every once in a while with some pretty big progress and some pretty impressive visuals, and then stays quiet for quite a while. This was a game that was announced before Alien Isolation, but bears a lot of similarities to it, or rather, maybe Alien Isolation bears a lot of similarities to it. It's got the 80s sci-fi feel, and maybe a little bit of a Dead Space vibe in there as well. The game's intent is to instill a sense of dread, and it does a great job. In some ways, it takes the idea of Stranger Things and applies it to space horror. That is, take a bunch of nostalgic ideas, put them into one thing that is also very original on its own, and I would say as long as the story works out to be interesting, this is going to be a good game. It looks great. Number 2 is Outlast 2, which obviously intends to build upon the gameplay of the first. The idea specifically echoes the name of the game, where you have to outlast the other entities. You're a cameraman, and as you know, that means you are not a badass space marine or anything like that. The protagonist is investigating a small rural town, trying to find information regarding a murder of a pregnant woman whom they don't actually have the identity of, and seems to be going for kind of a slightly religious idea, which means there could be a cult involved. I don't know exactly what the plot is. They've been kind of mum with it, which is good. And knowing how good they were able to build a game around the original concept of Outlast, I'm excited to see exactly where they took it now that they have the benefit of hindsight. It should be a pretty good one, so unless they mess up, which I doubt, I think we're in for something good. And finally, number 1 is Resident Evil 7. If you haven't played Resident Evil 7, what are you doing? This is seriously probably the best game in the series since one of the first 3. It is such a good game. The story is actually intriguing. They've managed to sort of recapture that magic of actually interesting characters that you want to know what happens to or already happened to. It's quirky, it's weird, and it manages to take some of the modern horror conventions and actually make them interesting. And no, as it turns out, it is really, really not a PT spiritual successor. Yes, it inherits some of the gameplay ideas, but this is a Resident Evil game once you get going, period. There's no way to get around that. When we look back on the games of 2017, one of the best is going to be Resident Evil 7, so play it. And a couple of bonus games for you, including The Persistence, a PSVR game that allows other players to mess with the main player using a tablet app. Ghost Theory, an indie game where a paranormal investigator takes on various missions and solves them in a sandbox fashion. And Allison Road, which shockingly enough was brought back to life not too long ago, late last year, and we're very excited for that. Which horror game are you looking forward to most this year, or has one already come out that you're pretty sure is going to be the best? Leave us a comment, and if you enjoyed this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now is a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every single day of the week. The best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription. Thanks so much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter @FalconTheHero, and we'll see you next time right here on gameranx.